You're listening to Content Logistics, a podcast for B2B marketers looking to build a content engine that drives revenue. In each episode, Camille Trent interviews the marketers behind the best content marketing flywheels and uncovers the tactical aspects of content production, from first draft to first customer.
Welcome to another riveting episode of Content Logistics. I am your host, Camille Trent, and this episode is brought to you by my good friends, Tristan and Justin, over at Motion. They are a podcasting agency for busy B2B tech marketers like myself, and also probably like you. So if you are thinking about launching a podcast, dreaming about launching a podcast, and don't want to deal with the production, the distribution, don't have time to deal with some of those things, talk to them. They will hook you up. They are responsible for all of the beautiful clips and quotes that you see on my LinkedIn promoting this show. And I've just really liked working with them. They're great guys. So today, my guest is James Scherer. He is the VP of Growth at Codeless. And I wanted to bring him on to talk about the logistics of fast tracking your content strategy through pillar SEO content. All right, so you went from director of editorial, which is a title that I actually don't hear very much in SaaS, but a title that I like to see, to VP of Growth at Codeless. And Codeless, for anyone who's listening, is kind of a highbrow content marketing agency for SaaS companies. I say sort of highbrow or like high tier because agency can get kind of a bad rap, but you work with clients like Monday.com, Freshworks, Hotjar, top tier content SaaS companies. So what I love about your title and then your change into growth is that I feel like a lot of people assume content people or editorial people aren't growth people, right? But there's like usually a clear like delineation of like you have your paid team and you have your growth team and then you have your content team and they're separate, right? And sometimes that's at odds, but your path kind of debunks that. And so I'm excited to jump into it. So today I brought you on to talk about pillar pages and how you took a client from 0 monthlies to 25K monthlies in less than a year. And one challenge with SEO for early stage startups is it's sort of a catch-22, right? Like you have to have decent authority and you have to have credibility to be able to build on that, and really getting the ball rolling is the hard part for people. They're like, I can't wait a year. Like I can't wait 5 years, right? Like to really make it work for me. Like we don't know if we have funding for that long, right? And so that's the problem that I often see. And pillar content is kind of it feels like kind of a cheat code, the way that you talk about it. So wanted to dive in that today and why it works so well. So why does it work so well?
It's a good question. Really quick, I want to address highbrow. I feel like my content agency just needs to wear top hats and exclusively I don't know, drink port and smoke cigars. We are very
That's not
highbrow.
the case. That's not.
No, well,
Okay.
I mean, sometimes Fridays. I mean, yeah, we're like, I guess, yeah, we're like a high tier or premium tier, I guess. Our content's good, I guess if that's the definition. So yeah, how does the pillar kind of process work? Firstly, you're right as well that like the client that you mentioned, Early Bird, they went from 0 to 25,000. I think what's exciting about that is they went from like not having a blog, not having a CMS, not having domain authority to 25,000 in a year. I think that's a very different conversation to talk to clients who've been around for a while, finding success with outbound and have a domain that's been there for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they have domain authority and links from other sources other than content. For them to go from let's do a blog and then for that to go 25,000 is a different matter. So I think what I was most enthusiastic about with Early Bird was that, yeah, they went from 23 domain authority when we started working with them to now 55 over the course of a year, and from 0 to 25,000 monthly or unique visitors. So yeah, really exciting success with them. And the core of what we do with them is the pillar and post structure. So first, categorization, like what do you want to kind of be known for? So identify your categories before your pillars. For them, it was financial literacy, budgeting, gifting, like financial gifting, and one other. But it was like, 3 to 5 categories, I would say, would be like the best place to start for businesses of any size, really. And then within each category, you identify the pillars. Now, the pillars are the high search volume, high competition, competitive key phrases that you want to be found for, but they're also kind of your pie in the sky searches. That if you were found for this search on the first page of Google for it, then like your business sees bottom line growth. Like that's what we're talking about. Clear bottom line growth, measurable bottom line growth. But what constitutes a pillar is going to be different for kind of each business. So when we start talking to clients who like money.com, they came to us with 82 domain authority. They had been around forever. They have a $12 million marketing budget per month and they're giving a fraction of it. Like they're doing okay. And we help them do volume. That was really exciting, but like it's also very different. The pillars that we identified for them are very different than they were for a domain with 23K. So identify first your categories and then the pillars based on what is pie in the sky to you right then within reason. Like if you're a software company doing marketing software, the key phrase inbound marketing or marketing automation are key phrases that are owned by HubSpot and Salesforce and Overlow, and like you don't mess around. But there are other kind of one tier down pillars, not as highbrow, that may be more attainable, but still like highly competitive, massive search volumes, just not quite as like ridiculous as some of the other ones. Yeah, so you identify those topics, create them first, get those articles live, make them amazing, and then get those URLs indexed. So Google can see them. They have traffic from organic to a certain extent, but more early days, it's just going to be newsletter, social media, and you promoting them. And then you support them with post, so pillar and post. And the posts are directly related within that category of content to the pillars, and you do backlinks internally to those pillars. And slowly but surely, and if you do everything right, you do everything well, and the content's excellent, you can start building momentum, firstly with those post pieces. They start ranking on the first page, and as soon as they get higher rankings, the value of the internal links goes up. So you build momentum with those posts, and then eventually those pillars rank, and then in a year, you're targeting whole other pillars.
Nice. That was a beautiful, beautiful overview. So let's talk about common pitfalls, though, because anyone listening to this would be like, sounds simple, I can do this. And then you go to do it. You're like, where do I start? Or maybe you do too many categories or too few categories, or you go after the HubSpots of the world. So what are the most common pitfalls that you see other people making when they try and implement this strategy?
There's two primary pitfalls, I would say. The first is trying to do it too slowly and not producing enough content, and which is, I know, weird because there's the whole massive quality versus quantity conversation in content marketing, which is a valid one to have. But I think we all have to be aware that SEO is creating something and throwing it against the wall of Google and hoping that it sticks. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. And the one time that it does, you're not entirely sure why. And I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm still not 100% sure why anything succeeds and anything fails. And I challenge any SEO to tell me with any true confidence whether an article is going to win or not. All you do is you follow all the best practices and you create content as well as you possibly can do and hope. So as a result of that, if we're trying to throw as many things as we can at the wall of Google, we need to throw a lot of them. So the primary pitfall I see people make is that they say, okay, this is the category that we're going to work on in Q3. And we create a bunch of content and they have their support, they have the pillars first and their support pieces up second. And there's all these internal linking. And at the end of the quarter, they haven't seen anything because either they didn't produce enough content or none of the support pieces stuck, or just because. So my recommendation is actually to identify 3 to 5 different categories of content with 3 to 5 pillars within each category with your top priority pillars published first, and do them all at the same time. It's intense. I would say per category, say you have 3 categories, you should be publishing 5 articles per category per month minimum. And over the course of the quarter, you'll see which one of your categories happens to stick naturally. And it's not going to be for any good reason. It's just going to be because Google likes that category more than others. For instance, early bird, as I mentioned, we identified financial literacy, budgeting, and gifting, like financial gifting. And for whatever reason, the gifting side of things just stuck for them. So that was that category became what we doubled down on in Q2. And then we kind of doubled down on in Q3 as well, kind of exhausted some of our initial research and planning, and then moved back to some of the other kind of like half sticky categories that we worked on. But either way, you need to like throw as much as you can and see what sticks and then double down on it. So that's the first pitfall. The second is not investing enough in each content piece. So we talked about quantity. The second pitfall is quality. A lot of people, especially in early days, there's an expectation that if you create content, and this expectation still exists despite the millions of articles out there that say it doesn't work, but people still create mediocre content and target a key phrase and don't optimize it particularly well, don't do high quality images, they just use stock images, or they do poor uncompressed screenshots that aren't optimized for page experience or for search. They still do massive paragraphs. They don't like bring the reader down the page. And then they still don't promote their content, and they still don't like, include the number of semantic keywords you need to compete with a SERP. Like there's a lot of stuff you need to do to create optimized content. And if you don't do it and then complain about it not working, I'm going to look at you and say, well, like, yeah, like you can't win race with that like hodgepodge car you had in high school. Like it's just not going to necessarily happen. Like the guy in the F1 car is going to win. And why are you confused as to why that's happened?
Yeah, no, there was a lot of good stuff in there. So I want to recap the last bit of it, because images, for instance, like that's something that we're investing in. But it's interesting because in a SERP, you don't typically see the images, right? And so talk to me about that. Like, why is the image important, the images within the blog post and featured image?
So, I mean, for a number of different reasons. Google does like images are, we believe, to be part of the Google algorithm, high quality images that are like high quality images, but like not massive in size, if that makes any sense. Like page experience algorithm update in May, June, image size has become more and more important alongside other page experience like variables. But I think for me, what's more important is that like when you have high quality custom web designed images that are high value and beautiful, it's the same as the reason that you and I have mics right now. Like we could just use our computer mic, but the reason that we don't is because if we want to have a professional podcast, then the audio needs to be clear. And so when somebody listens to this podcast, they know, okay, these people are professionals about this. So there's that trust involved in simply having high quality in producing high quality stuff. It's the same reason that we like make sure everything does go through autocorrect, or there's a reason we spell check everything. Because if I sent emails to prospects that had glaring spelling errors or grammatical errors in them, even if the value of what I said was amazing, they're still going to say like, well, you're not professional, you're not trustworthy. So clearly you don't care enough about this to make it as good as it can be. So why should I trust that you've any idea what you're talking about? And a lot of that stuff is subconscious. Web design is by and large subconscious, but we know when something looks clean, it looks better, and it just resonates more with people, and they trust the site that is that way. And it's exactly the same with blog content. Images are a core component of that, but so too is, the font you choose, the font size you choose, the white space on either side of the body content, the hero image, and like the size of all of this stuff does matter. Whether or not your page is cluttered with a bunch of sidebar stuff and CTAs popping up, like that stuff matters just as much subconsciously as it does actually at the end of the day with Google.
Yeah. So to break that down, user experience, right? Like there's the user experience side of it from Google, but also from the user, right? Like if my experience is bad, I might just bounce for that reason.
And bounce rates are a massive SEO factor. Like if we're talking about how can we increase the search orientation of your site, well, user experience, which is let's reduce bounce rates. Let's try to get people through to the next page of our site, and let's increase time on page. We know that bounce rates and time on page are SEO factors. So why are we ignoring them and saying like, well, page experience is page experience, let's focus on that? It's like, well, you've been looking at bounce rate and time on page on your Google Analytics dashboard for years, not thinking anything of it. And yet those are like Google's been telling us to pay attention to this stuff for the past 20 years, and we're still kind of confused to why they're caring about it now. It's like, well, they've been caring about it for the whole time. You just haven't been paying attention.
So the trust factor, I want to talk about that too, because trust, that's going to influence your revenue, whether it's through conversion rates or people eventually accepting a demo. If I see a lot of spelling errors, or a lot of, or like the tone is different every time, then you become less and less trustworthy, right? And so I feel like that's an important factor here as well, is do you want this content to convert? Like, does it exist to just exist? Does it exist for fun? Like, does it exist for people to feel good, or does it exist to drive revenue? And so understanding that too.
Yeah. So there's kind of two sides of that for me. The first of which is that like you talked at the very beginning about like it's rare for a director of editorial to become a VP of growth, which was kind of my career path. And yet like I've always been a content marketer. Like content marketer is my like what I am and what I do, but the job titles are kind of specific to whatever company I'm working for at any given time. And at the center of content marketing is like, it's as much about marketing as it is about content. Like there's no point in me writing a single blog article unless there's intent behind it. And the intent is 9 times out of 10 for most SaaS and B2B businesses in particular, it's lead generation and then eventual sales. With e-commerce, it's sales. So we need to be creating content that is oriented around conversion. That said, The other side of that coin is the trust component of just content in general. And we have some clients who are very much like, let's create content that converts. And we have some clients who are like, let's create content that gives really clear value and then maybe converts at some point, maybe. And I kind of align somewhere in the middle there. The reason that I'm in content marketing and love content marketing is because of the merit-based nature of it as a marketing campaign. Merit-based being you're providing value to someone and they come to you looking for that value. And when you provide it, they think well of you. And then when you say, by the way, our software, our service helps you do this complicated thing or this frustrating thing or this time consuming or expensive thing more easily, then they say, okay, well, you clearly know what you're talking about because you've been educating me for the past 10 minutes or hopefully the past 6 months or so of reading content consistently. So I'm going to trust you when I hear you say your software makes that easier. So that's kind of at the core of content. And I think finding that balance between how do I produce content that is both oriented around my site and what I want to be talking about and what I want to sell, because there's again, I think it's entirely legitimate to say this thing you're wanting to know about is complicated and expensive and time consuming. Our software legitimately does it more easily. And if you want to spend some money on saving yourself time, here's our service. I think that's a legitimate thing to do. Doing it well can be a bit challenging because most writers either err on the side of, I just want to educate, I don't even want to mention our brand. And some writers err on the side of like, let's exclusively use our brand examples. Let's never mention a competitor possibly existing. Let's like just shove case studies into the top of an article. And you're like, okay, you and you need to have a baby, and that baby is in my mind, promote your brand, but also provide value really clearly so that when you promote your brand, they trust that you know what you're talking about. And that's the core of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Because I've experienced both of those too, right? Like there's both sides of like the true like journalistic, like everything should be like editorial, journalistic, like very few cells. And then the other opposite side of it where everything is like copywriting and like meant to persuade. And there is something in the middle. Like I always say that it should be like content writing and copywriting like married like together to create great content marketing. So you mentioned this a little bit when you were going over pillar content, but I wanted to dig into a little bit on whether or not in these clusters that you're creating, if you start bottom funnel, top funnel, mid funnel. So I've like heard different theories on this, and I'm just interested in if you attack all of those like within your cluster, or if you focus on one to start.
It's very rare that like a good pillar will be BOFU. Like it's almost impossible to have a really high intent search also be high volume, because the highest intent searches are branded searches, which are low volume unless you're a couple of the companies for who it's massive. But by and large, branded searches are your highest volume, most BOFU topics, and they have no search volume. When you add phrases like software or tool to the end of a key phrase, like project management software or email marketing tools, those are more bottom of funnel as well, because the search intent behind it is, I want to find tools that do this thing rather than what is project management. It's how can somebody, or like what's out there to help me do project management. So those ones I'll call middle of funnel, middle bottom of funnel. But even those, unless you're in certain verticals and certain industries, you're not going to have a huge amount of volume. We have like even terms like onboarding software and stuff, like they're not massively high volume. You really have to get into like the marketing automation software and project management software to get more than 10, 15,000 searches per month on a regular basis. Granted, they have like thousands of related searches that will drive significant traffic to you. So I would say that those should be your pillars, kind of the middle of funnel pages should be your pillars, because A, there's traffic behind them, and B, there's also intent behind them. So at the core of identifying pillars is both search volume, but also if we got this article to the top of the SERP for this key phrase, would it do anything whatsoever for our business? I remember, if anybody's like messed around with influencer marketing much, there's basically one of the core components of influencer marketing is like identifying influencers who actually will attract your target market. Because it would be amazing for your SaaS business to get Justin Bieber to talk about it, but I don't think Justin Bieber's fans are your target market. If you're doing lead generation tools, like that's not what we're talking about. And content works the same way. So if you're identifying pillars, which are the influencer of the SEO game, you need to be identifying both high volume search terms, but also search terms that have an intent behind them that are related to what you want to be known for. And when people find you via that URL, they are seeing kind of what you do and relatively quickly, rather than having to go massively from top of funnel down to the bottom. That said, there's also something to be said for just driving a bunch of traffic. And there's nothing wrong with driving a bunch of traffic. Bunch of traffic is a key SEO factor. I don't think Google calls it bunch of traffic in their algorithm, but I call it bunch of traffic. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I would kind of play that. It's going to be based on case by case basis. Some businesses, especially in the early stage, they just want to increase the domain authority. And if there's a semi-attainable pillar that is low intent but high volume and they think they can get it, don't be afraid to just go after the traffic and figure it out later. Not least because, and this is a cheat, you can always change the content on a URL once it ranks. Don't be afraid to do that. Like, do whatever it takes to get that article like live and ranking and supported. And then after the fact, don't be afraid to go back in and add a CTA below the intro, or add another case study that just is super relevant to that topic that wasn't initially there, or add even more salesy language within that article. Because the fact of the matter is Google, it's going to take you far, far longer to get to the front of the SERP than it is like, but once you're there, it's actually quite difficult so long as the content is good and your domain authority remains good and the links stay live and the referring domains stay active. It's hard to get this far. It's actually harder to come off it. It takes way longer to get there. It doesn't take longer. Sorry, it doesn't take longer to get there. It takes a while to get there, but once you're there, you are relatively safe. The Google algorithm doesn't really work backwards as well as it does work forwards. At least that's my opinion. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, I feel like that. I don't know. That's a good way of putting it. The way that I was thinking about it as you were saying it is like, you can't start the race until you're indexed, right? And it is a race. Like, it still takes some time, and there's like some milestones like to get to that point where you want to be, right? Where you're maybe at the top of the SERP, but then you've also optimized it in a way that it's driving leads or it's driving revenue, right? To get all of those things right and optimized, as you said, takes a long time, but you can't really start the process until you're indexed, right? And so that would be like the reasoning behind just get it published and don't worry about it being 100% right away. You can go back and make it 100%.
Yeah. And also, one of the main things that we do after we've been with a client for 6 months or so, and if a client comes to us with like a bunch of existing content, one of the main things that we do within content planning and content strategy is review their content, do a quick audit of it, then check their 11s. So 11s being URLs that are ranking between 11th and 30th position for a key phrase with more than 500 search volume, or whatever search volume you kind of want them to rank for. So it's those URLs, 11th to 30th for a high volume key phrase, where they're not ranking higher for an unrelated key phrase. So it gets a bit complicated here, but what we're trying to do is grab the low hanging fruit, those URLs that are in 12th position for their target key phrase that has volume, and tweak them, optimize them, bump them, add word count, custom images, whatever, to get them to the 9th position. Because as we all know, there's no point in being, there's not a huge amount of point being 9th, but there's no reason at all to be 11th. So if we can identify those URLs that are just off the first page and bump them, that's going to be less use of our time, resources, and energy and budget to bump them to 9th than it would be to rewrite an entire article. So once you've gotten 200 articles live, wait 6 months and do a quick search with an Ahrefs, SEMrush, Moz for your 11s. But I'll say that one last complicated bit again. Once you have your 11s, make sure that they're not ranking for a higher volume, unrelated key phrase higher in the search results. So if you're 11th for project management or best project management tools, but you're 8th for project management software, don't optimize for best project management tools, because you could cannibalize your existing ranking position that is driving significant traffic. So just be aware of cannibalization when doing optimizations, but in general, that can be a better use of your time and resources than actually creating net new content.
That was interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. So just listen to this twice, like maybe 3 times, to just really get that cemented. But going back to pillar pages and the funnel, I wanted to recap this part too, because I thought this was interesting. Because I was hearing it tends to be top of funnel or mid funnel, but really what you should be thinking about is volume combined with intent, right? Is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And so if that happens to be a mid funnel word that you can target, probably go that direction, like versus top of funnel, because a lot of times I feel like with mid funnel stuff, you can still put like the what is content. You can still rank for like some top of funnel things with that. But there's typically more intent there. And so if you can do that right away, do that, but otherwise top of funnel just to get some volume going at first. And then you can support it with mid-funnel pieces that might be more of the templates and examples, and then later on like the tools for that to round it out on the bottom funnel. Was I understanding that
No,
right?
that's
Let me know if
absolutely
I
right.
can
And
think
you're
of.
yeah, you've gotten the additions to the search terms as well. So the best and software and tools are going to be your bottom of funnel, like high intent key phrases. Because I'm going to be typing like best email marketing tool is looking for the best email marketing tools. And if you're there, then you're the answer. Middle funnel, yeah, being like examples, templates, and then top of funnel being what is. Yeah, relatively straightforward. SEO is easy, man. Who are we kidding?
It's easy. Okay, we'll just stop here. You guys get it. Like
Yeah, you
just
got
let's just
this.
let's just start. Let's just had a couple more questions just in case for everyone who's not there yet. When did you start with this? I probably should have started with this question earlier, but when did your agency or maybe you as a content marketer start with this type of a strategy? And where was the light bulb moment where you're like, oh, this works. This is what we should be doing.
I mean, we've been moving it towards it. It's like I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, the first person to like talk about the pillar and post structure. Brian Dean came up with the Skyscraper strategy, which was I think back in like 2015 or 16, and that was a similar idea. So we were talking about that. The clustering contact, like SEO approach, is also very similar to the pillar and post approach. We started executing it like very clearly when I when I moved from kind of writing freelance. I was like living remotely and writing freelance for Codeless for a while, though I'd been director of inbound before, but I left and lived in Indonesia and wrote blog articles for a while. So when I came back and kind of like settled down back in an actual chair rather than a hammock, I moved to director of editorial and we started adopting with more intention the pillar and post strategy for clients. So one of my roles as director of editorial was overseeing the editors and writers, but also the client strategy, which is my background. And it kind of the light bulb moment for me was probably early bird was like the one where it was like, okay, this is proven now beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm happy to like do this across clients across the board. And for them, it was kind of the first time that I was like, let's do 3 to 5 pillars per 3 to 5 categories from the beginning, do content research on all of them, produce all of it, and then see which one of those sticks, and then double down on that category and those pillar and supporting those pillars after the fact, like once we know which one sticks. Really crucially here, I do want to give a shout out and mention that if you don't have an intentional backlinking strategy, like external backlinks and referring domains to these pillars, supporting content may not necessarily get you there, especially if you're in a competitive space. So I want to make it clear that while it will probably work, what I'm saying, it will work a lot faster. And if you have the budget for it, either build a backlinking team or go to one of those actually legit white hat, not sketchy backlinking agencies out there. They do exist, and engage with one of those because you're going to see results far more quickly. And I don't want to say that early bird succeeded exclusively because of me and what we did in our strategy. They also did have a backlinking team who I was basically, luckily enough, I was able to work with them. We actually have a sister company that we work with quite frequently, SERP, and I was saying, here are the priority URLs that you need to throw backlinks at. So definitely don't go away thinking that this will work without any kind of linking strategy at all. But yeah, that was probably it was when they were doubling traffic month on month so they started working with us kind of in November of 2020. And then by June of 2020, I was seeing 70-80% month on month unique page view growth. And then it kept going, and then 100% over and over and over and over again. Because I guess what's also relevant for that stat is they went from 0 to 10,000 in like 9 months, and then 0 to 25 in like the last 4, because SEO is cumulative and it's also like stacks. When a URL that you're linking to your pillar piece starts ranking really well by itself, then the link, as I said, the link to the pillar piece is worth more. And the higher number of backlinks that article has is on the first page of Google and getting traffic. And so people start referring to it, and you have more referring domains to the support piece, which means that the link that it goes to the pillar is worth more and more. And then when that pillar is also linking to its support content or to other pillars, then that pillar ranks, and then that pillar's ranking helps things rank. So it's all about momentum, but nothing works in the first. Give it 3 months, do this for 3 months, and then you'll see some murmurings in month 3, kind of 3, 4, 5, and then you'll start seeing some actual traffic in month 6, 7, and then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You'll see some exciting stuff, but be patient.
Yeah, I'm glad you set some expectations because there are numbers all over the place, right? Of like a year, 6 months, 3 months, a week. So yeah, setting setting those expectations of when these actually like kick in is good. And then the other funny thing is I actually had Brian like mention Brian Dean's Skyscraper like pillar strategy in this interview. So what do you think are the differences between those two? Because you said similar, but I feel like they are different. So Skyscraper, pillar, what are the differences?
My interpretation of Brian Dean's Skyscraper thing is that those pieces are massively, massively massive, and there's like 3 of them, which is legit. I would rather kind of spread my oats, however, and see what sprouts from them. But I don't think the Skyscraper strategy really communicated as well as it could have done, though again, it was 6 years ago, so, I mean, he was ahead of his time at the time. But what he missed out on and what I think this pillar post strategy kind of does is increases the possibility of one of your seeds blooming. And once it does, you can flag it and pay attention to it and nurture it and help it grow and then see if it helps other things grow. Whereas the skyscraper strategy was a huge amount of investment in a few pieces of content that if they didn't work, you were more, well, I've just wasted thousands of dollars and a huge amount of time and energy and resources that I am never going to get back. And that just completely flopped. Whereas the pillar and post, there's less investment in each piece. There's still significant investment, particularly in the pillars. I don't want to say that like you can just flippantly create content period of any kind, but there was perhaps an overemphasis on making these articles. I think right before he published the skyscraper strategy article, somebody had said that if you want to create something for a target key phrase, review the SERP and create something 10 times better than anything on the SERP. And okay, have you seen the SERP recently? The article that's on the first page and at the top of that article or of that search SERP is already amazing. And if you want to create something that's 10 times as good, you're going to be here for a long time. And if it doesn't work, then you've spent $5,000 on industry report level of statistic like identification and talking to interviews and getting an infographic made and a slide deck made and custom images and a video. Like that's what kind of was the vibe at the time. It wasn't long after the content shock thing came out. So like we were all in this phase of like everything we do has to be the best possible piece of content in the world that anybody could ever make, which is really scary for early stage and SMBs because they don't have $12 million per month in budget and you spend like 5-10 grand of it on a single article and then it flops. You're there like, well, we're never doing content ever again. Let's throw that 10 grand at ads and at least we'll get something out of it. So spread your oats, see what sticks. And then once you see what sticks and what grows, give it some love and put some other plants around it and see if they can't make it all the more beautiful. Oh, me and my analogies today. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. Analogies are like how things stick, I think. So I love it. So what I'm hearing is that it's the growth content marketing version in a lot of ways
Yeah.
of you're able to move fast, right, and iterate and not scare away your SaaS clients and your SMB clients because they're having to invest too much in one thing that we don't know is going to work is what it comes down to.
Another thing,
So
really
do
briefly,
the
sorry, I do want to get this in because it's important for listeners to know as well that since the page experience algorithm came out in May, June, I've seen significant drops in SERP rankings for our clients who have published massive articles. Like we had an affiliate client who was writing like 10,000 word articles with them like huge guides to whatever, comprehensive guide to whatever. And we have seen since the page algorithm update, significant declines in that type of content. So talking again about the pillars and the skyscrapers, A, you may fail because it just happens to fail, but B, you're probably more likely to fail now with insanely long, highly invested content than you were a year ago. So just be aware of that as well. I did want to get that in.
No, yeah, that's important too because what you're talking to is how user behavior changes too, right? And how, for instance, like there's a lot of factors that can go into that but it partly boils down to like instant gratification and like being able to get high quality content in bits and in video or in social, you know what I mean? And so just not necessarily having the patience or the interest like in reading like a longer piece. And if you do have a longer piece, yeah, needing to invest in, like you said, video, slides, infographics to make that valuable and all of that costing a lot of time, costing a lot of money. So I think that was a great breakdown. So for your pillar pages, around how many words are we talking?
Depends on the topic, 1750 to 2500.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good baseline. So that really is like It's a long article, but it's not the 10,000 like pillar pages that we're seeing before or
And
snippets
definitely
or something.
add internal structure. Like you need an internal TOC. If your piece is over 2,000 words, you should have a table of contents that links to the headers. And right, like have your introduction, hook them, tell them what the article is going to be about. It's like, well, what we do is hit home on the pain point that the article is addressing, agitate it slightly with like an additional sentence or short paragraph to like really hit it home, and then talk about the solution. And beneath that, do like this article will walk you through everything you need to know about whatever, and then do a TOC, which is relatively straightforward CSS, or if a lot of CMS have it now, that just navigates to the headers. So that if there is a specific section that people want to know more about, like the actionable tips section or the what is section or the example section, they can head straight to it without having to read the stuff in the middle. That just helps people navigate and increases kind of, it just makes the user experience better.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Okay, so rankings are one thing. Revenue, we talked about a little bit. So can you talk to, I don't know if it's private for your clients, but can you talk to the revenue growth? You talked a little bit to the 0 to 25K. What did that mean to their business?
Yeah, so that's actually the stage we're at right now. As of yet, Early Bird hasn't seen clear, trackable revenue growth from the traffic we've driven. And this is me just being straight up honest with you. Our content agency does like the content production and we do it really, really well. We leave it to our clients to monetize it. Though we advise, and I'm happy to jump on strategy calls with clients to figure out how best they can do it. And I've done that with Early Bird. They're currently in the stage of they didn't anticipate 25,000 unique visitors to this content in the time that we kind of did it in. And so now they're in this phase and they just hired somebody actually who's responsible, whose job it's going to be to convert traffic and readers into leads and sales. So that's kind of at the core of what they're doing right now. So I've been in talks this whole week and last week as well with their new kind of growth manager to figure out exactly how to monetize content. I know that I imagine that most listeners, that the search intent behind the key phrases they're ranking for is really high. They are a financial app essentially that like helps parents and family members like gift to children, like gift to young people. So their primary like ask is download the app within Apple Store or the Play Store. So it's a more complicated kind of sales funnel for them. So they're currently figuring out how can we talk about the app and like include more mentions of the value of it. And then once people download the app, which is of course isn't necessarily a paid thing, like how do we get them using it and actually make any revenue from this? So, and I think for a lot of early stage businesses, that's not an uncommon challenge that they face. You know you're supposed to drive traffic, you know you're supposed to have a beautiful website, and then you do those two things and you're like, sweet, so where's the money? And that's why concurrent with kind of probably like the second quarter of content creation, you need to, before you have traffic, also have a serious sit down conversation around, okay, once we do get it, because we're gonna, what are we gonna do with it? And Early Bird is kind of like working on that right now. And it's probably about 3 to 6 months later than I would have wanted them to do, but we're just the writers. I mean, it's more than that, but we're just the writers. We do have other clients, like we have a client, money.com, who's massive and a very different kind of world than Early Bird. Early Bird started without a CMS. Money.com started with 82 DA. So we wrote crazy high volume for them. They came on wanting to do 75 pieces a month, 75 by 2,000 words per month. And we did 825 pieces for them in the first 9 months of working with them, which was fun. And they are now ranking for 26,234 as of this morning, because I checked it before the podcast, new key phrases that they weren't necessarily ranking before, and 1,200 and something on the first page. So that's really exciting for them. And while I don't necessarily know the numbers, they're ranking for project management software, task management software, and like dozens of other high intent pieces, all based on the pillar and post structure that I have no doubt are driving thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Because I think their traffic from our content alone is something like 110,000 per month or something like that. But again, that's 825 articles and like hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment as well. But it can be done.
Yeah, no,
So
again, like it's good level setting on that, yeah, expectations, like
yeah,
what it takes to get there side of things. But also for listeners, like I want to point out, it's a lot easier to sell a product or to launch a product or to launch a new product when you have an audience, right? And so that sounds like it was kind of Early Bird's strategy, or even if it wasn't intentional, it's like, oh, okay, wow, we have a big audience now. Like now let's figure out what to do with it. But it is a lot easier when you have something to build on. The distribution is very hard in marketing.
but I
So
mean,
I
it's
do.
a good problem for them to have. Like they're not complaining about the traffic, but They just got to figure out what to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so besides, you mentioned obviously some examples, early bird, Monday. Any other examples that you want to mention? They can be your clients.
Sure. So a fun one that we're just kind of starting out with is moss.com. So they are like financial aid publication, and they have an app where like students and young people can like become members and get financial aid advice. They also just launched like a banking for students, an online bank for students. So really cool, really hip, cool, trendy business. Very early stage as well. Also didn't have a blog when we got them. We've worked with them since August, give or take. And again, almost exactly the same because, as I said, like I felt super confident in the pillar and post structure and everything around it with Early Bird, probably by around, like, I felt confident like doing it for all of our clients. With Monday and Early Bird, it came all around the same time. By time Moss came around, we were smack dab in like, yeah, this is a thing we do, and it seems to be working. They got off to a bit of a slow start, but we identified FAFSA, budgeting again, banking, student loans, and now university specific content and scholarship specific content. And I want to talk about those two. So in general, they're doing really well, and I'm really happy with their results. But their results are really quickly, their results are slower because they didn't have a backlinking or a link building strategy. So I eventually convinced them after like 3 or 4 months of working with us that they needed one in order to hit some of the competitive key phrases they were looking for to hit. So they've since signed on, and now things do seem to be moving. It may also be like that, SEO takes a while, but I do think the two things coming together have been a major part of their results. But those two categories. So scholarship specific content is one of those verticals that I hope for every listener that they can find. One of those categories that is just like very high volume, very low competition, because you're almost exclusively competing with the universities themselves. So those universities are going to be .edu domains, which are impossible to rank higher than, by and large. Edu, .org, etc. It's tough. So set your expectations a little bit lower, but we're still talking about key phrases that have like 1100 search volume and like 4 KD in Ahrefs and SEMrush, wherever you're looking at it. So really, really exciting ones. And for them, it's very easy for them to like, okay, if we rank for this URL, how can we then send students to other related URLs? And so the site design component of it was really core to what they were going to be doing. And this was kind of like my recommendation as well, was like, if somebody's looking at financial aid for like UFC, you want to make sure that they also see your educational content for universities very specific, like very related to it, in the same geographical area, targeting the same kind of things, same kind of cost, etc. So setting the site navigation was a core component of their content success, because making relevant content making readers very aware of it in massively decreased bounce rates, which are an SEO factor, and increased time on page, because they're reading the entire thing and then they're getting to the bottom and they're checking out which one of the ones they want to read next. So I trying to consider how am I getting this reader through to the next article is a big thing. And I would definitely think about that before you publish a single article. Well, no, you can publish one, but do it before you publish 2. How are you going to get them to go to the next one? But they've seen, again, we started working with them in August. They went from 1,100 because they had some weird traffic from other places on their blog to 12,000 last week, which I'm really happy about. So it's even quicker actually than Early Bird. But a lot of that strategy has been around identifying university specific and scholarship specific content that is very high MV and low KD, which for an SEO whose job it is to like drive results for their clients, I'm very enthusiastic about that. But they're a fun one as well, because now we got to figure out how to convert their traffic. So it's a conversation.
Nice, yeah. And I appreciate like the diversity of examples for people too, of like different industries, different types of results, different goals that they're trying to achieve, and how you might pivot a little bit based on that. So last question, and I promise I'll let you go.
No worries.
So resources, what do you need to make this successful? And what I mean by that is how big is your team? Like, what are the roles? What are some of the tools? You can kind of list them off.
Okay. All right, let's do this. I want every listener to get out a piece of paper, because I'm just going to do this in order. As far as resources, you need a good editor, and you need 3 or 4 good vertical expert writers, period. Unless you're a massive business and you want to do 20, 30 pieces of content per month, that's what you need. You need a project management tool to coordinate the production process. And we use ClickUp, but there's a lot out there that are great. You need an SEO tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush or Moz to identify topics and determine whether or not they're good opportunities for you to place them as pillars or as posts. You need to coordinate it all within the content planning sheet, which we use Google Docs, or sorry, Google Sheets. But of course, you can use your project management tool or Asana or Trello or Notion or whatever you want to do. But I'm a Google Sheets guy. I think people used to be Excel people. I'm now a Google Sheets person. So once you've identified the topics, put them into the content planning process, the production process, you want tools to make sure the content's good. These tools include Phrase, ClearScope, MarketMuse. Those are your let's check out what the SERP's doing and compare what's ranking to what I'm going to be doing. Now, how much you want to rely on those tools to create your content is entirely up to you. Me and my team, I've asked them not to use those tools to create content outlines. We have our own client-specific outline like templates that we use that I prefer, but there's value in seeing what the number one position URL is doing for their headers when you're targeting the same kind of key phrase. But just don't mess around with plagiarism. On that note, once the draft is created, it goes back into those pieces, and this is into those tools, and this is where I would say use them. It then compares what you've drafted, whether or not you use their outline, they're inspired by outline or not. It compares to what's ranking, and it says you are missing this subject matter, and therefore your article is not as comprehensive as the ranking content, so you need to add it. Whether that's examples, whether that's individual phrases, like if you're doing a project management tool article, maybe you need to include project planning because the SERP does. And Google says, well, your article is not as comprehensive in scope as the ranking ones are. So that matters. Semantic key phrasing matters. You also need to make sure the content itself is just good, sounds good. Tools like Grammarly, Hemingway app, writer.com can all do that. Writer.com, if you're an agency, allows you to actually import like brand specific guidelines and then check a content against those guidelines. Like this client prefers a casual tone of voice. So you used the word do not when you should have used don't because that makes it more casual. Or this client is more professional than casual, etc. Writer.com also does plagiarism checks. So will a tool like AutoCrit. Of course, Grammarly also does plagiarism checks. We've moved away from that simply because we found more accurate results that we trust more in other tools. So we're using AutoCrit currently. And then once you kind of have the content ready to go and it looks great and it's optimized for search and you can prove that with ClearScope, Phrase, or MarketMuse, a tool like Wordable will allow you to like take from Google Doc directly into your CMS without having to like format massively. And that just saves you 5 or 10 minutes, maybe even more if you could do because it'll take the meta descriptions and meta titles and images and like any formatting choices that you've made within Google Docs and just toss them in your CMS without you having to do it. So that's a handy tool. And then again, use Ahrefs to do analysis. So I do reporting based on, actually, I just use the Site Explorer functionality within Ahrefs. I don't necessarily even care much about the dashboards or the overviews. I'm sure SEMrush and Moz have a similar kind of thing. On that, I'm just looking to see where my content is ranking in any given month and when it goes up and down. And if it's plateaued on the second page, I want to make sure that I'm aware of that so I can optimize it to get to the first. And yeah, let me see. I think that's it. That's just for written content. We can have a whole other conversation about every other type of content, but that's probably enough for now.
No, this is great. I want to be respectful of your time too, because I know we're a little bit past. So anyone who has listened to the end, though, just hit the jackpot, I think, with that breakdown of tools and resources. So thank you for that. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. Lastly, where can people go to find out more about you and Codeless?
Yeah, I mean, codeless.io is the website, and I just did a redesign launch today, so go look at my new headline. And you can also go to JD Scherer, Scherer. That's my Twitter handle. But yeah, I mean, check us out on the website and see if you need some content marketing help, and we'd be more than happy to jump into at least a conversation about it, what you want to do.
Excellent. Okay, well, James, thank you again for coming on, and let's stay in touch.
All right, thank you, Camille. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Content Logistics. This episode was produced by Motion, a done-for-you B2B podcasting agency for busy marketers. If you liked what you heard, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.